This video is kindly brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Bethany. I'm the girl behind Well Loved Knits, and today I wanted to share a short list of some of the most common knitting mistakes and how to spot them, prevent them, and fix them. So I know that there are a lot of resources out there for knitting mistakes, but I've been getting a lot of these questions recently because some of you are even beginner knitters new to knitting, and a lot of my patterns are also written for beginners in mind. So I thought it would be really nice to have just one video where we could address the most common ones together. So I've said this before, I'm usually a knitter who will overlook some mistakes. I like that homemade hand-knitted feel that, hand-knitted sweaters have. But, there are some mistakes that you just can't overlook, and it is worth taking the time to fix them. So that's where these tips kind of come in, and hopefully you will be very happy with your final piece once you address these mistakes. So before we get into all of these tips, I want to say a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. This video is kindly brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Whether you'd like to start creating and selling your own products, showcase a portfolio of your hard work, or create a space that is unique to you and your personal experiences, Squarespace can make it easy to create your dream website. And you can do it without any experience in web design. Squarespace is so easy to use. Simply start by picking a template from their beautiful range of designs, which you can customize to your heart's content. This is the aspect of Squarespace that I really love. When I created wellovedknits.com last year, I wanted something beautiful without the headache of learning HTML code. I love that I can share free patterns and blog posts with you guys and update my shop in just a few clicks. So if you're interested in creating an online presence for yourself, check out squarespace.com for a free trial. When you're ready to launch your website, go to the URL in the description to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So thanks again, Squarespace, and let's get into those tips. Okay, so starting out, we have two mistakes that I'm kind of lumping into one because the way to fix it is pretty much the same. And this is something that even the most experienced knitter from time to time will have to deal with. And that is drop stitches or noticing a couple rows down, there's a mistake in your work. So like I said, the way to fix these are very similar. What you'll need is a crochet hook, or eventually you'll be comfortable enough to use your knitting needles. So drop stitches may seem pretty scary, but they are easy to fix, I promise. Here I have a swatch in stockinette stitch and a stitch that has been dropped from my needles, undoing a few of my previous rows. To fix this, you need to insert your crochet hook into the first stitch that is still intact. To identify this is basically the last little loop of that column. So you'll need to pay attention to the loose bars from behind this stitch. Each one of these corresponds to a row. What you'll need to do is insert your hook into the last stitch intact and use that hook to grab the lowest bar and pull it back through. You can use your fingers to catch each stitch as you repeat this step for all of the loose bars at the back of your work. Now, if you were working in stockinette stitch, but the right side was considered the purl side, so the back side of the work, simply turn your work around and easily fix the mistake on the knit side. Trust me, that'll be such a lifesaver. If you see a mistake a few rows down, you can also use the technique I mentioned before, or do the following. This time I'm going to tink, or knit backwards, to the stitch column where the mistake occurred. Since the mistake is just one row below, I can easily fix it with my knitting needles. You may have an issue where you're seeing holes popping up in the middle of your work. This can be caused for a couple of reasons. Either you're knitting into the same stitch more than once, or you're doing what's called a yarn over. Both of these mistakes are actually techniques that you can use in certain garment construction to increase the amount of stitches, and it helps the fabric move in a certain way. So it's technically a technique, but if you don't mean to do it, it can be pretty frustrating. So let's see how we can prevent these mistakes from happening in the future. You can accidentally knit into the same stitch more than once if you don't fully slip that stitch off the needles after working it, like so. If you're still getting the hang of knitting, it's important to work slowly so that you can make sure each stitch you work is fully off the left needle before inserting the right again. As you can see, the stitches of the row I just worked look very different and much looser than the rest. Like I mentioned, a yarn over is also a common knitting technique, but if you're not working increases or lace, it really shouldn't be happening. A yarn over is done when the working yarn is wrapped around the right needle once before working the next stitch. You could accidentally do this if you set your work down halfway through and maybe forget which stitch you're working, for example. These large holes are what's left in my work after a few accidental yarn overs. And on top of that, I was left with more stitches than I actually wanted, which is another mistake to look out for. So creating an even fabric can be pretty difficult, especially if you're new and you're trying to work things out, and you ultimately have to frog, which is to rip back your work, and pick up from where you left off again. A lot of beginners can notice that their fabric doesn't look even the whole way around. For example, you might be left with a row of stitches that look a little off and even twisted. This is usually caused by, again, ripping back and putting the stitches on incorrectly. So let's look at how we can fix that issue. Take a look at the stitches I have here on my needles. You may notice that the knit stitches face towards the left, with the right leg of the stitch appearing at the front. If you fail to pay attention to how the stitches are sitting on the needles, this is how you'll get those random row of twisted stitches. So when sliding stitches back on the needles, in stockinette stitch in particular, keep the right side, or the knit side, facing you. Slide each stitch one at a time, and as you do so, make sure each stitch is facing towards the left. By doing this, you can continue working as normal without any twisted stitches. Holes around the increases of a raglan stitch can be really frustrating and ultimately really distract from the intended design. I find that this has to do with a combination of factors. It's either your tension, the yarn that you're working with, or the needle size, and the way in which you make those increases. But then again, sometimes it happens out of nowhere and you can't really explain it. If you do everything the way that you've done it before and it's coming up, it's a weird one. And it's hard to figure out exactly what the cause is. What I normally do is try to limit the amount of tugging that I do when I'm making the increases on either side of my raglan stitches. So what I mean by this is when I pull the bar between my stitches, I try not to pull it so drastically. I work really close to the tip of my needles in the hope that this will prevent any stretching and, as a result, holes along my raglan stitches. But then again, try not to fret and trust the process, because sometimes what looks like holes will actually close up and come together after blocking. Here's a hard lesson that I learned recently, and a mistake that I even made. And I make it all the time because I haven't really done this technique before, but I'm sharing it because I've had, like I said, a really hard lesson in the importance of lifelines and how to insert them. So yeah, I want to share that with you. So all of these issues could be prevented if you insert a lifeline. And a lifeline is basically an insurance policy that makes sure that you don't make high risks and you don't have these huge mistakes that you are so sad about ripping back. And this is especially true for really complex knits, but as a beginner, this could be a really helpful habit for you to start getting used to, so that when you do eventually graduate to more difficult knits, you will be fully prepared and you won't have to worry too much about those mistakes that you might make. So here's how simple it is to add one in. Take some scrap yarn from your stash and thread it through a needle. We're going to thread the yarn through the stitches that are live on the needles. You can do this one at a time, or however you feel comfortable. It's important to note that if you're working on circular needles, it's easier to thread your yarn through at the cord. And it's really that simple. You just need to make sure that when you're working your next row, you avoid any of the scrap yarn so that it doesn't get twisted into your stitches. And you don't have any excuse now. It's so easy to do that you can easily insert a lifeline here and there. Every couple of rows would be a good way to make sure that you're not, ending up dropping stitches, you're not really messing up the pattern, everything is fine, you don't have to have that stress. I think it will be a great thing for all of us to do, beginners and experienced knitters alike. Okay, I know I talk about this one a lot, but it really is important for me to add in. I have to add it in any chance that I get, especially for those of us who are really just like consumed by our passion for knitting. This is a really good reminder to, limit our knitting time. A big mistake that you can do is to spend too long knitting in one sitting, in one posture, in one, state. And in this way, you can really fatigue your muscles and lead to wrist pain. I'm observing a lot of my peers over on Instagram talking about how wrist pain is a really big issue that they're dealing with. A lot of you have commented this as well. And a way for us to really make sure that this doesn't always happen, or that we can really mitigate the risk of wrist pain, is to really, limit our time knitting at least in one space. And making sure that we take breaks in between. Maybe working with different needles is also a good way to kind of switch things up and kind of get into a different, again, posture. Posture is a huge thing. I'm noticing that my posture right now is really terrible. So giving your body plenty of time to rest in between, and also allowing your body to move and switch positions can really help you in the long run and make sure that you're knitting for a really long time in the future, like many years. Many years to come. Yeah, so there you have it. Those are some of the most common knitting mistakes and how to fix them or how to prevent them. I get a lot of these questions, like I said, so I hope that this video was helpful to you in some way, and if so, just definitely let me know in the comments. If you have any other requests for beginner related videos, also feel free to drop those down there as well. So thank you so much to Squarespace again for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate them supporting the channel, and I appreciate you guys for supporting brands that support me. And I also really appreciate you guys watching this video, so thank you so much. Be sure to like this video if you liked it, and maybe even subscribe to stick around, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!